Hello. Today I thought we would do my take on a video idea I've seen from a few different people, but basically books that break my rules. So I'm somebody, if you watch this channel, you know I'm pretty omnivoracious. I read and like a lot of different genres and a lot of different things, but I do have some kind of personal things that I don't tend to like as much typically. And I thought that this might be an interesting video to just talk about, there's always exceptions to rules. So I may not like something in principle, but sometimes with the right book, it works for me either because of that or at least in spite of that. So I thought this might just be a fun way to explore some of the things that I don't typically love, but that I, with the right book can be persuaded to enjoy. So all of this is to prove that nobody is fully consistent. Nobody can be fully predictable in terms of what they will and won't like. And isn't that just the joy of idiosyncrasies of human taste and enjoyment? So first, I am well known for saying that I don't really enjoy, or I guess I don't value super detailed world building. I tend to refer to that as being somewhat masturbatory because I usually feel that those details are more about the author trying to communicate that they've really thought this through and sort of show off their world building Bible that they have in the background rather than really serving the story. And I know that that's not how everybody feels. Some people just all they want is world building. They just enjoy that as a thing unto itself. And that's just not usually my jam. But the glaring exception to that is that I love The Lord of the Rings. And I probably would say The Lord of the Rings is my all-time favorite fantasy thing. And all this is masturbatory world building. I mean, that's a huge, literally the Silmarillion, come on. And Tolkien is where that impulse came from in fantasy, really. I feel like he's the one who sort of set the precedent of having super detailed world building. So obviously with the right author, I can get on board with it, but I would say I kind of feel like I often say that he sort of spoiled me for that, for detailed world building and for sort of epic meandering fantasy, because he did it. I loved his version of it, and I just have never loved people trying to do the exact same type of project as him since. I can't really think of an example of me loving that from another author. So anyway, all that to say, I don't typically love that, but with him, evidently I do. Okay, next, I'm gonna say that I am definitely on the record of not loving what I would describe as navel-gazing literary fiction. And I think that this is another example of, I read a lot of it when I was younger, and I think that I just got burnt out on it because when I was thinking about this, I came up with a couple of examples where I do enjoy it. The one I pulled was Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, but I think that this is an example of, it's something that's hard to do well, and once you've read a lot of the classics or sort of best known examples of that type of literary fiction, for me after that it all does start to feel quite samey and quite derivative. But obviously, this isn't a super old book, so obviously books can come along and kind of surprise you and still deliver on something. But I would say as a rule, sort of just very introspective, navel-gazy literary fiction isn't always my favorite. But I will say this actually, I think for that type of book, has a surprising amount of plot. The other one that came to mind when I was thinking about this was Stoner. And I think that it's just I think that the way that he progresses through time is so masterful that it sort of distracts from the fact that it's quite a very quiet literary novel. I don't know. Anyway, both of those were the ones I thought of, but in particular, Gilead, I feel like is an exception that proves the rule, meaning it's hard to do this well. She does it very well, but not everyone can. And then just a trope in general that I'm kind of just a hard sell on. I don't always dislike it, but I don't tend to love a time traveling novel. One that I did really enjoy is The Light Brigade. I really enjoyed this as an example of, I felt like a time travel trope that didn't feel overly maudlin or kind of faux deep, and because I don't think it doesn't spend a lot of its energy getting into some of the ethical conundrums that can come up with time travel novels, and I think that was definitely to the book's benefit. It's much more a plot device than the thematic content. It focuses its thematic energies elsewhere, and I think that in general is a theme I see where I do like a time travel novel. Often there's a different thematic emphasis that's not just about the ethics of time traveling. So this is an example of of a time traveling novel that really worked for me. And then I don't tend to love a hard-hitting YA contemporary. Actually, again, I think it gets into that sort of faux deep thing. I guess that's been true for the last 3 of these. I just think that it can become quite melodramatic and emotionally manipulative, which I get for a younger audience to a certain extent. As an adult reader of YA, I just want something that's actually a little bit more substantive when it comes to why I'm upset or crying. A big exception to that would be A Heart and a Body in the World. Probably I could throw Firekeeper's Daughter into this as well, but that's really a bit more of a mystery thriller. So just like a pure hard-hitting YA contemporary, this book I think earns the tears that it had extracted from me. I think it actually has the thematic depth that merit the level of melodrama or pathos that this evokes. And I also appreciate the restraint of focusing on sort of like one hard-hitting issue, as opposed to the other thing I think YA contemporary that are hard-hitting tend to do is that they just like throw, you know, the whole kit and caboodle at the protagonist. So it's like they've been the victim of an assault and they're going through a really emotionally abusive breakup and their parents are getting divorced and their grandma. It's like everything. And I appreciate the restraint and sort of the focus of this book of really just having like a single thing that is driving the situation that the character is in and why they are having such a hard time. So anyway, I love this book and I think it's an example, again, exception that proves the rule, which is it's hard to, I think, have the level of genuine depth that these types of books go for, and I think this achieved that. Okay, and then I have basic bitch medieval fantasy worlds. I don't tend to love. I think because I did read a lot of those in my sort of like middle school through college years. I read a lot of what at the time was YA fantasy, and a lot of it was in basic bitch medieval fantasy worlds, and I think I just kind of got tired of that, and at this point it doesn't feel very fresh to me often. But a nostalgic pick is Robin Hobb, and there's definitely plenty of Maura Pierce tends to have that. Tolkien, as we were talking, you know, there's plenty of basic bitch medieval fantasy worlds I have enjoyed, but in terms of like reading new ones, like new to me authors, it's harder for me to get into that. And I think that this is definitely an example where the real star of the show in this is not the world building or the plot, it's the writing. The writing itself is so wonderful and evocative. It doesn't matter that it's got doesn't have like kind of a new perspective in terms of some of its influences. I think the writing itself is what you come for in this particular series, or with this particular author, I should say. Angsty historicals, I tend to be somebody who, for romance, doesn't like my books angstier. I tend to prefer them sort of in the more easy breezy kind of vibe, or if it's not going to be that, then I can also get down with sort of like a romantic suspense where it's not necessarily easy breezy, but the plot, it's still much more of an external conflict rather than an internal conflict. I think that's, I struggle with our conflict is we both have a lot of feelings. That's just not my favorite. I definitely have ones I've enjoyed like that, which we will talk about, but in general, that's not my favorite. And particularly in a historical, I don't love that because I'm so aware of the power dynamics that are intrinsic in an overtly patriarchal structure that it's hard for me to sort of like suspend my disbelief and just go with the flow and enjoy the book. But I will say Courtney Milan's more angsty historicals work for me because she acknowledges and names that power dynamic. So because I know the author is aware of that interplay that's happening, I think I can get into the flow of the book and still enjoy it in a way that I struggle if that isn't acknowledged textually to some degree. That's, again, this is all very much a me thing, but she's a good example of a version of this that works better for me because I think she addresses the thing that typically doesn't work for me in that subgenre, if that makes sense. Okay, and then a dual timeline and a mystery thriller. Now, I'm on the record as that's not my favorite. I usually feel like the reason a mystery thriller has to have flashbacks is because there is a structural weakness in the plot. And that is that if you knew some of the information that the characters in the current timeline know, you would be able to figure out exactly what's going on. And to me, I just think that it's a little bit of a cheat. Sometimes I'm enjoying the book so much that like, it's whatever, I don't care, it's fine. Other times, it just, for me, completely diminishes my enjoyment of the book because I am annoyed that I feel like the author didn't address a plot issue that they should have before writing the book, or even more damningly, often I vastly prefer one of the timelines, so whenever we get to the one that I don't like as much, I'm just sitting there like, yeah, let's get back to the part that I'm actually interested in. So with that being said, it's not that I hate it and it's not that it can never work for me, but it's a harder sell. And two examples of ones that I thought, one YA and one YA speculative and one sort of just like a mystery, thriller, horror, adult kind of thing. So The Broken Girls actually has 3 timelines really to it, and all 3 of them worked for me. I thought that it wasn't a cheat. And my test actually for all dual timelines is, if this was told purely linearly, would I still enjoy the story? And for both of these, that is yes. So I think all of the points of view in this are really successful, and I thought that all of them were equally interesting, so I didn't resent spending time in either of the timelines. And then this one, The Kingdom, is a YA speculative kind of mystery thing, thriller, I guess. And I thought that the reason I wanted to highlight this one is that I actually think making it a dual timeline increased the successfulness of the plot that would have worked just fine had it been linear. If this had been told in pure linear order, I still think that this would have been pretty fun and enjoyable and suspenseful, but by making it a dual timeline, it actually increased the suspense legitimately, in my opinion. So I thought this was a good example of where I felt like it was a legitimate choice as opposed to covering a structural weakness. So those were the 2 I picked for that. And then finally, I don't tend to love romances that don't have on-page sex, not because I particularly, sorry, just had to take a call. So anyway, back to this. I forget exactly what I was saying, but I think I was talking about how usually, the reason that I care about sex on the page is not what it is specifically doing for the book in terms of me particularly enjoying sex scenes, because I frankly think that a lot of sex scenes are pretty perfunctory and not that imaginative and not that integral to the story. I often will end up skimming them if it's from an author who I don't feel like does them very well. But what it communicates to me is a level of sort of like sex positivity and like body positivity and a lack of squeamishness about sex. And that's really more what it's about for me often. Or in the case of like a Ruby Dixon, it's like, okay, what the hell is gonna go down in this sex scene? Like, what kind of new wackiness are we gonna get up to? Act Like It is one of my all-time favorite romances, Lucy Parker, and it does not have any on-page sexuality, but it has enough references to sexuality that I think that there's no feeling on my part that the author just doesn't, is sort of like icked out by sex or thinks that her characters are above such trivial bodily things. It just feels more like it happens off page, we know it's happening, and she just, I guess, didn't want to write the sex scenes in this one. I don't know. In her subsequent books, she has written them, and I think they're actually pretty good. Like, they're pretty character driven. So I don't know. But anyway, this is an example of one where I feel like there wasn't a sex scene and I didn't miss it because I felt like the author communicated her attitude towards sexuality and the level of character development that I think sex scenes often also represent. Usually it represents an upping of the emotional stakes of the story. I felt like she found other ways to do that successfully. So there you go. And with that, I think that will do it for this run through of things that I don't normally like in books, but that I can be persuaded to like, or really I think more just like exceptions that sort of prove the rule. I think it's funny to me, sometimes I'll see comments on mine or other people's videos with sort of gotchas of like, haha, but you said this one time and now you're saying this. And it's like, I get that to some degree, but I also am like, nobody is perfectly consistent. I will always go back to my rule of people like what they like, people don't like what they don't like, and some of it is just like down to the whims and whatever of the subjectivity of human taste. So with that being said, let me know if you have books that you feel like you wouldn't expect yourself to like, but you did end up liking, and maybe any of your thoughts about some of the things that I don't tend to like, if you agree or disagree. Not with me, because you won't talk me into liking something that I just don't normally like, but why personally it does or doesn't work for you. And yeah, I think that will do it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!